The room was dark, the smoke clouds wafting up to obscure the overheads that made the man's shiny face all the more noticeable. He was sweating heavily, stammering out the last few minutes of his set as he told the crowd about an incident with his mother when he was 12. The audience, stoners, hipsters who've been drinking since noon, watched him like a bug under a microscope. They wanted to be interested in what he was saying, but really, they were just hoping he would burn up in the harsh overhead lights. At the end of the day, there's nothing better than watching a comedian crash spectacularly. I took a swig of my lukewarm beer and made notes in my notebook. I'd been doing comedy for about a year, and doing comedy is a lot like Alcoholics Anonymous. The guys who have been doing it longer than you are always super smug about it, and they have 1,000 different sayings. They just tell you to keep working the program, no matter how much you hate it. In this case, the program was a 15-minute set. Randy, a 5-year vet of the stage, had found me doing stand-up at my college. He said I had some chops, but suggested that I work on my 15-minute set until I knew it backwards and forwards. Once you know that set better than you know your own hand, then you can start adding new stuff. 6 months later, I'd been doing the same set for 6 months without fail. I felt that I knew it well. I could have quoted it in my sleep, and I had tried to add some new material from time to time. The bits were snappy, the one-liners were delivered perfectly, and Randy had even said that some of my new stuff was good, though off script. I felt that my bits were topical, without being inflammatory, and that my stories landed without being too long-winded. I wasn't ready for Comedy Central, but I was more than prepared for the little dive bars that seemed to be where I was cutting my teeth. So, why was I only receiving middling laughs? The guy on stage, I hadn't bothered to learn his name, stumbled off the stage to some polite, if not strained, applause. He flopped onto the couch next to me, wiping the sweat off his forehead. Randy took the mic and started attempting to get the crowd excited for the next comedian. Randy was usually the MC of these events. His reputation had been made over a half a decade of funny, and the crowd was always glad to see him. He was building me up, getting the crowd hyped for my set, and as he introduced me, I stood up to scattered applause and made my way to the stage. I mounted the stage, a beer in one hand and my notebook in the other, and I set up for the crowd as they murmured and coughed. I adjusted the mic, dropping it a little for Randy's 7-foot-tall height, and the audience seemed to find this amusing. I could see many familiar faces sitting amongst the smoke, and smelled the cheap beer aroma of whatever was on tap. The audience was almost always the same barflies and regulars who came to hear the same jokes repeatedly. I was always happy to see them, and their tip money at the end of the night, but I remember wishing for some new blood amongst the spattering of drunks and stoners. Oh, how God mocked me with his answer. So I'm pro-gun, hold your booze. A few half-hearted boos came from the crowd as though in answer. Someone online asked me the other day if that meant I would shoot a home invader, which it does, but as a comedian who works for tips, I don't usually have anything worth stealing, so it's not usually a problem. Some scattered laughs followed this. Well, they always followed up by asking, "What, don't you value human life more than things?" Well, I tell them, clearly he valued my things more than his life, so I must have nicer shit than I thought. Some half-hearted laughs greeted the end of my joke, but they were perfunctory at best. The crowd came in just as I was setting up the next joke. Have you heard of this guy that makes paper out of elephant dung? Yeah, I shit you not. They take the dung, clean it, press it, clean it again, I hope, and, through a process known only to the paper maker, they create an eco-friendly paper that's safe for the environment. The crowd shuffled in as I set up my punchline, and though I couldn't tell exactly how many there were, it looked like at least 20 people as they filed into the back of the room. I couldn't tell if they sat down or not. The room seemed to get darker as they filled the space. They didn't fill in the empty spaces left by the sparse crowd. They just kind of hovered near the back of the room, in a cloud of strange silence. I realized I had paused a moment too long, and was stretching my punchline out before I continued. But it's like they say, isn't it? One elephant's crap is another man's 50 Shades of Grey. The crowd actually laughed at that. This joke was so ridiculous that it never failed to get laughs. The group in the back, however, burst into sudden and immediate laughter. The laughter was welcome, but a little unexpected. It was hearty, almost manufactured, and it rolled out in a jolly wave that seemed to take some people by surprise. I saw people in the front jump a little as 20 or so people burst into spontaneous laughter, and I smiled a little, nodding and asking if they liked that joke or something, before continuing on with my next one. The crowd of newcomers were definitely what we needed around here, and I rode the wave of their laughter into my next bit. You ever wonder why you never see any hipster necrophiliacs? The front row shook their head, but the back continued to laugh mechanically, because they'd have to screw them before they get cool. The laughs from the front were more akin to groans as they accepted the corny joke, but the back of the house burst into the same mechanical laughter they had before. I was energized. I was pumped. I was receiving what I thought was my due at long last. These people were eating up what I was putting down, and it tempted me to do something I'd been working on, but just hadn't brought out yet. So my mom called the other day, and the crowd in the back hadn't stopped laughing at her. They buzzed with this sort of constant canned laughter as the others died down and waited for the next joke. Some had turned to look at the crowd behind them, and I could see some of the other comedians looking at them with misgivings. Their laughter never changed, never rose or fell in volume, but kept chuckling out in that fake sitcom laughter you always hear on Friends or How I Met Your Mother. She lives in a small town, 2 stoplights and a Walmart, and the town has a dog that's become a sort of... I was starting to lose my focus as the crowd kept laughing. They never tired, never stopped, and I could see one of the comedians getting up to say something. The audience wasn't watching me anymore. They were all craning around in their seats, looking at the crowd that chuckled on and on. The comedian, it was Mark for sure, walked towards the back. As he did, he was suddenly obscured by the smoky darkness that seemed unaffected by the murky overheads that flanked the stage. He stopped on the fringes, saying something to them as they laughed in response. He suddenly clapped his knees and began to bray that donkey laughter I had heard from the stage on many occasions. He laughed long and hard, joining the throng as his brays were lost amongst the grating mirth. After a few seconds, his unique sound was lost amongst their glee. Town mascot, I continued as I tried to power through it. It sleeps in the middle of the road. People feed it and leave it water. They drive around it and bring it inside at night, and everybody knows who he is and why he's there. I was losing focus. I could see Randy approaching the stage, plugging in a mic so we could remind the crowd to keep it down and respect the comedians. And I hoped that this was just some kind of prank. The laughter had been going for nearly 2 minutes now, and it was becoming abrasive. It was no longer flattering. I was no longer heartened by the laughter. I was becoming creeped out, and if this was someone's idea of a joke, it wasn't very funny. I heard the static when Randy's mic slipped in. Okay, people, let's remember to respect the comedians and keep our laughter to a respectable level, okay? The laughter continued, uninterrupted. I stood on the raised stage, looking out into the inky blackness and watching the chuckling tide. They rumbled out their artificial laughter in the face of my confusion, Randy standing by the stage, glaring at them. When he sat the mic down, I could hear the reverb as it made an angry sound. He set off for the back of the house then, not a particularly long walk, but he didn't seem to want to make it. When he got to the throng of people, he started shouting at them to be quiet. Randy had come to the same conclusion I had. He thought this was a big joke, a flash mob, or maybe even something set up by Mark, and he was not amused. I watched from the stage as his shouts became confused chuckles, his chuckles becoming guffaws, and then it was all over for poor Randy. He stumbled into the mob, grinning and laughing, and his laughs were soon consumed by that tide of laughter. That's when they started moving forward. The crowd was up now, scenting danger, but the strained group blocked the exit. They could do little but watch as the shuffling mass crept forward. They seemed to float as they came, sweeping slowly towards the crowd that had congregated near the stage. Some drunk let fly with a pitcher of PBR, the pitcher spilling as it flew end over end. But if the crowd was slowed by the beer or the heavy glass vessel, they didn't show it. Other men charged them, meaty fists raised, but fell to their knees, laughing before connecting with anything. The group rolled over them, and when they passed, there was no longer anyone on the ground. The closer they got, the less I felt like I saw any of them. As the barflies began to chuckle, their knees shaking and their fists pounding their chests, the more my feet began to drive me towards the back of the stage. The group was made of human-shaped creatures. Their features were dark and undulating, their mouths laughing, white teeth smiling as their eyeless faces bobbed with mirthless laughter. Those who were absorbed by them were never seen again. Those who were absorbed by them never stopped laughing. When my back smacked against the wall, I knew I was out of places to retreat. The fabric curtain that covered that wall felt soft under my sweaty hands, and it was only then that I realized I was still holding the mic. I let it drop, the feedback yarking angrily, but I hardly noticed amidst the din of emotionless laughter. The tone never rose, never fell, just remained at the same level of soulless noise as it drove ice picks into my skull. I closed my eyes, sinking to my backside and covering my ears with my hands as the mask came up to the edge of the stage. When the overhead light hit it, the mask recoiled, and the laughter sounded like tortured screams with a thin veneer of hilarity. It sounded like the laughter that comes creeping out of the windows of an insane asylum. It sounded like the laughter one hears in hell. I closed my eyes and prepared to be consumed. I knew that I, too, would begin to laugh any minute. I would be hopeless to resist. I would simply start to chuckle, start to guffaw, and before I knew it, I would be running to them. I would gladly join the throngs of laughing fools if it meant an end to this hell. I was standing alone outside the joke, and even now in my terror, I longed to be part of it. I don't know how long I sat there with my hands over my ears. One minute the world was a sea of robotic laughter. The next, it was simply gone. I lifted my head to find the bar's back room completely empty. The other three comedians, Mark, Randy, the audience, they were all gone. I was the only one left, the only one not laughing. And when I left the bar, the owner watched me go with some confusion. I never came back again. I knew I couldn't stand on that stage, not after what I had seen, and I certainly couldn't tell jokes again as I thought about the grinning audience of living darkness. Turns out, that was the first of many retreats that night. Over the next few weeks, I saw the audience again and again. They were in the grocery store as I checked out. They were outside the bus as I rode it to work, standing outside the bus stop and looking at me with their eyeless faces. The night they were at the foot of my bed, I knew I had to leave. I packed up everything that mattered to me, got in my car, and drove until I ran out of miles or ran out of money. Turns out, the money came first. I ran out of gas next to a little motel that needed a desk clerk. I've been handling that desk for the last 2 years. I'm pretty good at my job. I make the guests laugh. I'm always at work on time since I live on the premises, and I can eat anything I want from the hotel kitchen as long as I don't go too crazy. I found friends in this little town. Not the same as the ones I had, but they're good people. They tell me often that I should be a comedian. I tell them that in another life, I was. When I go to sleep, I get to live that other life and listen to the chuckling crowd as it drags itself closer and closer to my stage. I always wake up before they get me. I hope they never do. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Well, those of you who remember the other story I did about the laughing audience will know that this is our second foray into that genre. But keep in mind, there will be many, many more to come. We are very far from being done with the laughing audience, and I'm beginning to think there might be a book amongst those chuckles somewhere, so keep an eye peeled for that. Let's go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronana for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributor. And thanks to Glen Jenkins for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I do. You can also get your spooky a day early on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Just sign up as a $5 patron, and they post on Patreon every Tuesday and Thursday. So, come on and get your videos a little bit earlier than everyone else. It bears mentioning that I do custom pieces for interested parties. Glen Jenkins is a member of my Ghostly Writer tier contribution, and if you'd like to maybe get something custom written, maybe something spooky just for yourself, I always tell people that's the most economical way to do it, so come on down and have a look. My message box is always open. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.